Welcome to the Key Chapters of the Bible podcast. This is a daily podcast that's going through the key chapters of God's Word. A lot of times when we're reading a book, we might read about all kinds of details and not really understand why they're important. But then in the final pages or the final chapter, everything comes together. Well, today we're going to the final chapter of the book of Isaiah, and we're going to see how this chapter pulls together everything we've been studying for the last few weeks. Now, as I mentioned, this is our last chapter in the book of Isaiah, and I hope that this study has been as much a blessing for you as it has been for me. I've always loved the book of Isaiah, but I love it that much more having gone through it with this depth together with you and just seeing all the riches it has for us. It's just been a great study, a great time together. So I'm kind of sad as we come now to Isaiah 66, but I'm also glad because this chapter pulls everything together. So by way of quick review, the book of Isaiah starts out with God's indictment upon Israel and the nations. Nobody properly obeys him. They've abandoned him. They're pursuing cisterns without water. And so the Lord's going to bring his judgment upon this earth. He'll wipe out mankind and establish a new kingdom filled with people who will actually obey him. This kingdom will also be ruled by a king. We call him the servant or the Messiah. He'll be born of a virgin, Isaiah 7:14. He'll be from the region of northern Israel, Isaiah 9:1. He'll establish the everlasting throne of David, Isaiah 9:7. His kingdom will be one of peace in Isaiah 11. The Spirit of the Lord will rest upon this one, and he will be God, and he will bring with him a new covenant to enter this new kingdom. And in Isaiah 53, we saw that the king himself will die for his people and ransom them from this world, atone for their sins, so that they have a rightful place in that kingdom. In Isaiah 55, the offer of this kingdom goes out into all the world, and those who accept that offer in Isaiah 58 will gather together and produce a righteous society that we read about in Isaiah 58. And so with all of that, finally today, we learn about the manner and the means by which all of this will come about upon this earth. And we see this in Isaiah 66. So let's dive into this chapter, starting in verse 1. Verse 1 starts out with the Lord declaring just the expansiveness of his presence. He says, heaven is his throne and the earth is his footstool. In other words, God has an awesome presence and power. He dwells in the heavens and everywhere. And so the second line of the first verse asks this question, where then is a house you could build for me? I mean, where is this going to be? Do you think you can build a temple big enough for me to dwell in? You can't. In verse 2, the Lord has everything he needs. He's made everything. He doesn't need mankind to make anything for him. And so the last phrase then of verse 1 asks this question, where then is a place that I may rest? Now, if it's not in the temple, if that's not where all this is going to happen, then where is this going to happen? Well, the answer is then in the second half of verse 2. The answer is in the heart of him who is humble and contrite of spirit and who trembles at my word. You see, this work of God begins at least here in the hearts of the people, and he only dwells in the hearts of those who are humble and broken in their spirit and aren't trying to do their own thing, and who tremble at his word, who hear God's word and have a true life focus to obey what he says to do. This is the person that God dwells with. This is the community of believers whom God dwells with. Remember 2 days ago, we were in Isaiah 58, and the Lord was admonishing the people for delighting in the so-called near presence of God, but he actually wasn't with them. It was just an emotional sham. How do you know? Because they weren't actually seeking to obey the Lord. When the Lord is dwelling in a person's heart, they will be seeking to obey him. Those folks back in Isaiah 58, they just wanted an emotional experience, a mystical experience. They had no intent of actually knowing God and obeying him. And therefore, God didn't dwell among them. Likewise, yesterday, we saw in Isaiah 59 that their sins had created a separation between them and God. He wasn't going to dwell among them because they really didn't even want his presence among them. God dwells among those who are humble in heart, broken in spirit, and who tremble at his word. Now you might ask the question, well, what if we're not humble and contrite and obedient? But what if we're super religious? Would that make up for it? Well, verse 3 gives us the answer. No, it's not going to. All of that religious stuff, without a true heart of obedience to actually love God and worship him, that actually just compounds a person's sinfulness. If you go around killing oxen, offering sacrifices, but you don't believe you've really sinned, you don't really need to be atoned, well, you might as well be a murderer before God. If you go around sacrificing lambs, but you don't believe in anything it's pointing to, well, you might as well be offering up a dog, as in not that it's a tragedy to offer up Fido to the Lord, but rather back then dogs were unclean. It would be horrifying to offer something unclean to the Lord as worship. This same idea is brought out when the Lord says a grain offering might as well be swine's blood, and burning incense might as well be an act of idolatry. Why? Well, the last two lines of verse 3 tell us. They're doing their own thing without any attempt at obeying the Lord. They delight in sin and not in holiness. And therefore, in verse 4, God's condemnation will come upon them because he has called out to them, but they weren't listening. And so there is a huge division between those who tremble at God's word and those who don't. The Lord even speaks of this division in verse 5 when he tells his people, that even their own brothers will hate them. They're going to taunt them. They're going to be saying, hey, show me how happy you are. And tragically, they'll find out when they say things like this, that is they who are going to be ashamed, because in verse 6, the Lord is coming to bring judgment upon this world. And so now let's move on to verses 7 and 9. Verses 7 and 9 pictures this judgment like the scene of a mother giving birth. There is much pain, but that pain brings forth new life. And so the judgment that's coming upon this world will also be that of a new birth, a new life, a new work of God. And so it's kind of hard to tell in verse 7 who the she is here in these verses, but she's the Jerusalem that's mentioned down in verse 10. She will give birth to a boy in verse 7 and boys in verse 8. Now, there is some debate about who's this boy and who are these boys, but in light of everything that we've been reading so far in the book of Isaiah, I suspect that Isaiah is talking about the Messiah here, Jesus, and he's talking about just those who come to the Lord and follow him as their king in the new covenant. And so then dropping down to verse 10, with the birth of this new work, the Lord is calling everyone to rejoice with Jerusalem, like you would rejoice with a mother who's holding her newborn baby in her hands. She's got this little baby, he's so cute, you just rejoice with her. And here's the thing, when we see this, we know that God's plans for Jerusalem are getting close to being fulfilled, at least in their primary duty. The primary duty, remember, all along was to bring forth the Messiah into this world. This is what we've been waiting for all the way back to Genesis 3:15 with God's promises to Adam and Eve that one of their descendants would destroy Satan. And so now that Jerusalem has produced this child who's going to be bringing this new kingdom where Satan's not ruling or has any part in it, Jerusalem's purpose, at least the initial purpose, is nearly fulfilled. We're going to see, though, as we go into verse 10, we might be tempted to mourn, like, oh man, now it's done. But her role is not complete. You see, God's plan for Israel is not done, and she will not be completely eliminated from the plan of God. And so the her there in verses 11 and 12, that's still Jerusalem. And she will be filled with peace like a river, and the glory of the nations will flow to her. Still in the end time, she has a plan and purpose. For now, she's going to nurse this new baby to health, and then he's going to go out into this world. But she will still have a plan at the end of time. And so in verse 14, those who see this recognize what's going on, and they have joy because God has given them the privilege of seeing this salvation be born upon this earth. But interestingly, as we now go on to the next section of Isaiah 66, in verse 15, this new life will now grow to bring judgment upon the earth. And the Lord himself will come and return in fire in the chariots of a whirlwind. He will pour out his anger and fury and judgment on this world, and in verse 17, on those who engage in unclean practices. And so, although his judgment will come upon those who rebelled against him, in verse 18, the same judgment will also be a gathering of the nations to himself in his glory here. Just this sense that when Christ returns, he's going to gather his people to himself as well. And in verse 19, he's going to send messengers throughout the world to the distant coastlands announcing this new work. And God's people from among those nations will hear his voice. And like a family of brethren from among the nations, they will gather on the holy mount of Jerusalem for worship and present themselves as a grain offering to the Lord. Notice here in verse 20 that the Lord calls them a grain offering. Now you might remember from Leviticus 2 that a grain offering was a voluntary act of worship where a person recognizes God's goodness and his provision, and they just want to give thanks to him. And so here in verse 20, when the nations see the greatness of the Lord, his goodness and his provision, they want to give themselves as a grain offering to the Lord as worship and praise. They're just going to celebrate him and just say, Lord, thank you. Here, I just give you me. Thank you for all that you have done. Not only that, but in verse 21, from among these believers will also be priests and Levites. And that's a big deal because under the old covenant, priests and Levites could only be from the tribe of Levi. But here in the new covenant, these people are true worshipers, and therefore they are fully authorized to be priests of the Lord. And then in verse 23, in this new work of God, the people will continually offer God worship and praise. So just this beautiful picture here of this coming kingdom. But in verse 24, we see this will not be a glorious time for everyone. In verse 24, it tells us what will happen to those who reject the Lord. And now, with the worshipers of the nations, they will be able to see the corpses of these who have sinned against God, and it's going to be a gruesome sight. You're going to have this unquenchable fire. You're going to have this worm that's just eating and never satisfied. And these people, these corpses, those who had disobeyed the Lord, will just be an abhorrence to everyone who loves holiness. And so that's Isaiah 66, and that's the book of Isaiah. These last few weeks have just been such a great study of the outworking of God's salvation. And this passage here ties together all the pieces we've been learning about so far. And it just gives us the final question of where. Where is this going to happen? It's going to come forth from Jerusalem. It's going to come forth as one who is newly born. That new work of God will grow there starting in Jerusalem, but it will spread throughout the entire world. The people of this new kingdom will have humble hearts, broken spirits, a trembling obedience at God's word, and they will gather together to worship and celebrate him. And so that's the where. And now if you're wondering the question of when, that's a key question too. Well, that's going to be given to us in the book of Daniel. For now, we just need to know that these prophecies began to be fulfilled with the first advent of Jesus. They're even being fulfilled in our lives now as the gospel is going out throughout this world, and they'll be finally fulfilled when Jesus returns a second time to establish his new kingdom once and for all. And so for us as believers from among the nations who have accepted the offer of this covenant, for now we just kind of put our focus on Christ and his return. And since his law is written on our hearts, we'll seek to pursue kingdom living here and now and living out what we see in Isaiah 58. And so as we reflect on this chapter and really this whole book, one question would be, how is your heart doing? Is your heart one where the Lord dwells? Are you humble before him? Are you broken before him? Do you tremble before him at his word? Well, if not, you may not be one of his people. Remember, at this point in the book of Isaiah, there is a huge segment of Judaism that worshiped God with outward obedience and dead tradition, but it was just learned by rote. It was not true, living, obedient faith. And verse 3 lets us know that that kind of dead, lifeless worship will not be pleasing to God. In fact, it is counted in the most wicked of terms. So if that's anything part of how we are, we need to repent of that and just seek the Lord that we would have humble hearts, broken spirits, and hearts that tremble at his word. And finally, if we are those from among the nations who have accepted this offer, this covenant, and we're looking forward to this coming kingdom, we can already begin to offer ourselves as a grain offering of worship to the Lord. And if it's been a while since you've said to the Lord, Lord, I give myself to you as an offering, why not end your time there with the Lord today, just offering yourself to him as worship? That's a great place to end. It's a great book. Thanks for going through it with me. It's been such a joy. Tomorrow we pick up Jeremiah chapter 1. I can't wait for that. Thanks so much for listening for today and for this whole podcast series. Please tell others about it. Let them know about it as well. And with that, I hope you have a great rest of your day. God bless.